I reviewed Senua's Saga, Hellblade 2 this week, and one thing is very clear. Now that it's out and about in the world, gamers are very divided over the experience as a whole. Some are saying that it's a wonderful, emotional, cinematic journey, something similar to the first game that they liked, while others are saying it's just an interactive movie and it's not very long and it's not very much a game. This got me thinking, could Ninja Theory have done things a little differently to create more of a traditional video game type experience that many of us would expect from a game that's charging a pretty decent price and calling itself a video game? I grabbed my notebook and I jotted down some ideas, and we're going to dive into them right now.
What are you doing?
There's something here. I need to find out what it is.
In my review of Hellblade 2, I said that it blew my mind. And that is completely true, it did blow my mind, but that was from a technical point of view. This is the most amazing, beautiful looking game that I've ever seen. I don't think I've ever seen anything on that level, and I think it is clear because you look at people like Digital Foundry, who are the biggest sticklers for quality and graphics, and they pay the most attention to this sort of thing, and they said exactly the same thing. They didn't come out and say, oh, it's up there. They're saying this thing is significant. The problem is the question, could this be more of a video game? Could Hellblade 2 have been more of a game and less of just a straight cinematic experience? Now, before I get digging down into those ideas, I just want to point something out, something that I've seen a lot in the comments of my review, as well as going around social media, and people are saying that Hellblade took 7 years to develop and is only 5 hours long. I've seen this being said by multiple people, and it just actually isn't very true, and I'll tell you why. But I think I know why this opinion has come out, and that's because people are going onto YouTube and they're finding these single playthrough videos where they're putting Senua's Saga there out at like 5 hours for a complete playthrough on a video. And the problem with the flaw with that sort of outlook and that logic is that those videos are always quite streamlined, so they're always come in at a much lower playtime than actual people playing a game. For example, if you look at God of War that came out in 2018, it's a game that on How Long to Beat, it's listed at about 20-ish hours for campaign and a bit of side stuff, that sort of thing. But if you go and look up a video online, it says, there's guys who have these straight playthroughs, and they're like 13 hours. So that's a 7-hour difference on a 20-hour game, for example. And that's just not how things are. And there's also people like me who, I tend to take my time in games in a way. I like to look around and gawk at things and stuff. So a 20-hour game will easily take me 25 to 28 hours at times. So anyway, that's what I think caused this sort of mentality to come about, and then maybe it just got repeated and it sort of flew around. So what I want to talk about here is the facts. And that is the fact that Ninja Theory is around 80 people big as a team, which is pretty small. And to give you a rough idea, the team that made God of War was about 250 devs. There were over 2,000 people that worked on The Last of Us 2, and Insomniac is around 520 devs, and this is all from information I found online, even from their own sites. And the other thing is that people say that this game took 7 years to make, but that's actually not true at all, because people are taking the last Hellblade and this one, and they're sort of bridging that gap and saying, well, that's when Microsoft bought them, this is how long it took them to make it, and things like that. But in reality, what they've showed is that in 2019, when they first showed the game off, or they first announced it, there was no game. And just after that, when they started trying to work on it, they were also moving offices, COVID hit. So they were basically in big trouble, because this is also a game that requires lots of motion work and mocap and things like that. So in reality, they said that the game actually really only started in 2020, meaning that it was more of a 3.5 to 4 year cycle. And then on top of that, there was all the COVID restrictions that slowed them down. So in reality, let's say that everything went perfect. It's a 3.5 year to 4 year development cycle on a team of about 80 people. You can even compare it to something like Alan Wake, which was made in not too different of a time frame. And Alan Wake's a much more involved game. It's a longer game. It's also got really beautiful graphics. Some people in the comments mentioned it. But it's got 130 people working on it as well. And that's not an insignificant amount of people. That's 50 more people working on that game. So there is that. And then let's not also forget that this game is really focusing on the visual aspect of it. That is where a lot of the resources are going into. And I don't think people understand how much work goes into those, how many resources are required to hit that sort of visual fidelity. It's quite crazy. I think if anything, this is teaching us more about, the realities of development than people realize. Like, if you want a game that looks as good as Hellblade 2, but you want it to also be like The Last of Us, you have to spend a crap load of money, and you have to have a lot of people working on it, and you're going to have to do it for quite a long time in order to actually achieve this. But also, I don't want to come across as someone who is trying to defend them or make excuses, because the truth of the matter is they still set out to make a video game, and it's released for Xbox on Xbox Game Pass, and it's on PC. It's being sold as a video game. It's not a full price game, but it's not a cheap game either. It's not a $20 sort of range game. So we have to look at it from that point of view. Now, that's where there is some, people are justified to say, hey, you know what? I don't think this is worth the money, because this is just, you may as well watch a movie. And I mean, in reality, the truth is, if you go and watch this game being played on YouTube, you're not going to get that much of a different experience than if you play it. I mean, the interactivity, of course, makes a difference, but I mean, it's not drastic. It's not the same as if you're going to go, if you go and play, like I mentioned earlier, God of War, you're not getting the same experience as Hellblade. Now, I know they're two completely different games, but that's also sort of the point, right? They're both video games. They're both releasing on consoles. You control them with a controller and so on, right? So I want to move on to the next bit, but I just want to make it very clear. Making video games is very, very hard. And even though I've been doing stuff like this for quite a long time now, over 15 years, it's worth noting that we really don't know what developers go through and what the realities are of those development processes. Alright, with that said, let's take a look at Hellblade 2 and how I think they could have potentially improved this to make it more of an experience that would have, at the very least, gotten people to not be saying the things they're saying about it now. And also, if you have any ideas or any comments about this or any responses to some of the things I'm saying, drop them in the comments below. I really want to hear them. Alright, I want to kick things off by talking about the puzzles. Now, compared to the first game, the puzzles are quite similar. They're actually, a lot of them are quite the same. You have things where you have to go and walk around the level and line up symbols. They also included that one in this game where you walk around and you sort of focus on these bubbles, and it maybe changes the environment around you so that you can walk around and, get to the things you need to get to. Now, these puzzles are a little uninspired because, number one, they're a little bit overly familiar, so they needed to do something here to make things feel a little bit more fresh. And at the same time, I don't think that they are even quite as good as the puzzles were in the first game. I actually enjoyed, and I mentioned this in the review, I thought that the level design was a bit of a step back because of its realistic setting. I quite liked the little areas that they developed for the first game and the way you had to navigate them and sort of get around. So when it comes to these types of puzzles they've done, one of the big problems is that just not too long ago, Alan Wake 2 came out, and if you've played it yet, which I know a lot of people haven't gotten around to yet, it does similar things to this, where environments around you change. You could change things quite drastically in Alan Wake 2 with something on Alan's side, and it's done in such a masterful way that it blows your mind, and it's so clever. In this, it's really quite simple. It's, if you activate this thing, a wall opens up, and if you activate it again, the wall closes, or something that's on the roof is now on the floor. Things like that, okay? And the puzzles aren't even that, there aren't even that many of them. They're quite few and far between, with a whole lot of walking in between. So I can understand that people get frustrated. I mean, what are you really playing here rather than just moving around? So my idea is that they could have added one or two new puzzle types to the whole experience as opposed to what they did now. And I'm not talking about some crazy things. I mean, if you look at indie games, there are so many great little puzzles that get included in things. And you look at all the clever little puzzles in those games, whether it's like assembling something to power a door, or figuring out a dial on some ancient, interface or something like that. It's just things like that. And it's not stuff that is, it takes work to do the stuff, sure, but it's not like crazy. It's not like they're doing things like Tomb Raider and Uncharted where you have to go and build an entire level that moves and shifts and, lifts up monuments and all these things so that you can traverse the area. It doesn't have to be that crazy. It can be quite simple. Just add one or two elements of decoding or figuring out runic symbols where you have to like run through a process to get through it. Just something. And they could have added more of that into the experience just to keep players more engaged and doing something. And another idea I had is, for the sake of possible replayability even, because there is a little bit of a thing now. I will get to spoilers a little bit in this because the review was pretty much spoiler free. Now, I'm not going to spoil major story beats, but what I will say is that the game does have a function that when you finish it, you can play it again with a different narrator to give you a little bit of different context into the story. So they do want to try get people to play it more than once. So if that's the case, why not have puzzles that have some sort of randomized element to it? I mean, if you think about stuff like Fallout or Cyberpunk, when you go and do the hacking or in both games, things like that, there's a number generator that pops up or something like that where you have to just solve through it. Now, I know that's not maybe the greatest puzzle in the world, but it is something, and it is something that is different and engaging, and you can do it 10 times over and you're going to get a different outcome just based on that. So that's what I would have done there. Just add a little bit more of something to get you through. There's so many areas where you have to like move through a crevice or something like that. Could they not have put just a little magic barrier on it and had something that Senua needed to do just to sort of decode it so that she could get through? Have it play into a mental aspect, something like that. So on the next one, combat, right? So we've got a very similar type of combat to the first game. As we heard, it's one-on-one. We heard it was going to be one-on-one only, but I think they come up with some very clever ideas to make it feel super engaging by having these sort of transitions between them. So when you're fighting with someone, it's moving often between, as you kill them, another person comes and knocks them over, or and you carry on. So they did a good job in keeping the ball rolling that way. But really, this combat system's quite simple, and I even believe, I'm a bit foggy on the first game, but is it even simpler than the first game? I think it might be, but could they not have added just something there as well to add to the whole experience? So here's an idea. Add a weapon. Add just one more weapon that can maybe change things up. What about the fact that some of the enemies throw an axe at you? Why can't you have some throwing axes? Or, when you make distance between them, put that in with a bit of a mechanic. Or at the same time, have a different type of sword. Or maybe a bow and arrow that could be doubled together a little bit with the puzzles. Because, as I was saying now with the puzzles, if you add something like a bow and arrow with a bit of range, you suddenly open up your puzzles to being able to just shoot some things and break them so that it opens something up. And it could be used for the combat as well. So nothing crazy, I'm not talking about full character sets of, move sets like Kratos has, or that you unlock in something like, Devil May Cry. I'm just talking about something. And also maybe some skills that you can have some variation, again, for some replay value. Maybe have people pick between 3 different skills or something that you can pick 1 or 2, but you can't get the third in one playthrough. So you have a reason to come back, and maybe it's something like an extra powerful hit, or it's a super dodge or parry everything, something like that. I'm trying to be reasonable here. Something that isn't a major inclusion to the gameplay, but it's just enough to add some flavor. This is what the game needed, is more spice. So that's my idea for combat. Again, leave some comments below if you have any ideas. The next one is choices.
You have to help her. Now it is time to lead Senua. Now you have to choose. You can feel it. All right.
So what I found, and I also mentioned this in the review, is that many times in the game there's moments where Senua has to make a choice, and the voices in her head are even telling her, "What are you going to do? Don't tell her. Don't do this. Don't go there." And but she does it. She makes the choice. You don't make the choice. And these are interactive video games. You're supposed to be playing this person. You're supposed to be doing more than just witnessing someone else make a choice. So why not just put a few more of those things in the player's hands? There's one place later in the game where you actually can make a choice, and it doesn't even make that much of a difference in the end, which is a bit of a bummer. But at the same time, if you added a few of those over the course of the game, you actually have at least, maybe they're not that, maybe they don't have that much consequence as a result, but at least you've got a bunch of them over and together to say, okay, well, I weaved a little bit of my experience myself, and maybe it had a different response voice-wise from people, or maybe just a little bit of a path difference, something like that. So that's really something I think they could have done. Just put a bit more choice into people's hands, and again, for replayability, next time you can do it the other way. The last one is exploration. So there are a few collectibles in the game, but it's things like, finding hidden faces and a few of those totems, and most of it gives you basically just lore. And that's great, but people might want just something a bit more, again, to make this a little bit more of a traditional gaming experience without sacrificing the concept that they had for the video game. They still want it to be an emotional, cinematic, narrative-driven experience. So, but why not just have something a little bit more? Maybe certain little runes that she's collecting in a bag. Just that you've got something more around to look around and pick up. And again, a bow and arrow could have helped a lot. I really liked in God of War, I liked the Odin's ravens that were around. So you would just spot one, and then you would take your axe and you'd go chucking it off and you'd knock it. And it's nothing major, but it was a fun little thing to just include in the environment that made you say, hey, I think I heard one of those things. You look around, you find it, boom, you get it, and there's a little bit more to it. It could be kind of fun, right? And the other thing is, let it lead to something a bit more than just lore. What about some loot, some basic loot in the game? What about just a different skin for your sword, or just a slight change of some of her clothing, a sash, a head thing, or something? Just, again, the kind of thing that by the end you could say, well, this is my Senua. I picked a little bit about what she was holding, what she was wearing, just enough that you can say that you crafted a bit of your own experience with your own choices, and it was because you did something, because you achieved something. And yeah, and that essentially comes down to what I think they could have done. So in a nutshell, just to sort of summarize here, add one or two little extra, almost randomizable aspects to the puzzles to keep them a bit more interesting. Expand the combat just a little bit, with just a little bit more to improve it on what was before. Add a little bit of choice to the narrative experience, even if it's minimal, just keep the player engaged that way. And then lastly, make the exploration a little bit more interesting. Give people a reason to poke around. I mean, they spent all this time on these environments, all this time and all this effort making Iceland and making it look so real. I would have loved to have more reasons to look around, to play again, to gawk at the scenery just because I'm actually scanning the horizon for things in the distance or things around. I would have loved something like that. So yeah, I say this again with a lot of respect for these developers and a lot of the work that goes into these sorts of things. But I think that this is the kind of reasonable thing we would have expected from not just any game, but from a sequel. You want to see a little bit of an evolution. You want to see something new. You want to see something change. And unfortunately, besides the graphics and that technical aspect of this game, I don't think anything changed much for the better. And as I mentioned before, I think things actually went backwards a little bit, which is a bit of a shame. And I think that when you're making a video game, you need to respect the fact that the interactive elements need to be strong enough that the player feels like they're engaged in the experience, which clearly for many people this wasn't. So I mean, did I like playing the game through? I did. I enjoyed the experience, but at the same time, I also I'd be lying if I said that I wasn't a bit disappointed by the end. It was a very short game. It's not 5 hours long like some people are saying, but it was quite a short game. And by the end of it, if you really ask yourself, what did I do? You realize, well, I did a handful of puzzles, and I had a couple of cool fights with some cool music, and it was very cinematic. But really, what have I done? What was my part to play in all of this? So that's my take. What do you think? Hit the comments below and let me know. I'd love to hear from you. Thanks a lot for watching. If you enjoyed the video, please hit the like button to let me know, and make sure you're subscribed and check out the rest of the channel. Thanks for joining me for my notebook. I'll see you soon.